Hello all, and for this video I want to give a sort of brief overture as we switch to Aristotelian ethics now. And as commonplace as we've discussed with Greek thinking, going from the pre-Socratics up to Aristotle at this point, we've noticed that within the culture, the association that ethics has towards a view of the soul, of the human soul. So Aristotle, like before him, he has the same sort of terminology and word for soul as association with life force and vitality that's described or ascribed to all living things. So you can see really the budding here of a sort of biological vitalism from Aristotle. Life is distinctively a force or entity that has properties to it other than just simply material matter, and it has a sort of functionality to it that matter alone cannot offer for us. So there's a sort of vitalism going on here. And we can see out of this that Aristotle is going to give one of his big contributions, which is, of course, the development of the hierarchy of the soul. And so we're going to briefly discuss each state within the hierarchy of soul, starting, of course, with the vegetative. Also could be described as one of nutrition, for that is really primarily its function, is just reproduction and how the vegetative reproduces, and as such requires nutrients to continue to self-sustain, to reproduce, to live. And then moving up the ladder, you have the locomotive soul, which is the kind of life that has physical movement. So we're seeing the expansion now of territory of a being who can actually, move around and act upon it into the world. And then followed that, you have the sensitive soul, which is the capacity for sensation. Which introduces the appetitive soul, or the appetite. And then, of course, we have at the top is the rational soul, which is, the top of the hierarchy, if you will. And to put simply, this is saying things, some things, of course, are simply vegetative. And in addition, you add on through the hierarchy here more attributes such as the locomotive, and then in addition you have some beings with the sensitive, and then of course you have human beings atop the hierarchical chain here, which has the capacity for the rational soul. And so solar life embraces all of these, and ultimately what distinguishes humans out of all other living things is our capacity for the rational soul. Capacity meaning to function in certain ways, or has it properly in the process of growth, if you will. Growth, for example, develops or actualizes the Aristotelian potential. So the soul then has the essential nature or the form of a human being, and so you do have to take note of the potentials here. So, the human soul has an essential nature, or a form, if you will, that will then be actualized from, of course, the start of human development. So, of course, you start off as, something vegetative, such as the case with, being an unborn child in the womb of a pregnant woman. You, over time, gain actuality, of course, as you go through the birthing process to then have locomotion, and then you have the capacity or the potential for sensitivities that will eventually be actualized along with the growth of this human. And so the rational then will be also introduced after one ascends to the sensitive, because of course sensation is really where you begin to have input, if you will, towards being rational, because of course you have to have some sort of sensory capacity within you to be able to think abstractly, to be able to have access and participate in form or truth, if you will. And so it's worth pointing out here that you can see, despite the fact that Aristotle doesn't have much to work with, or a scientific understanding, if you will, of such complexities such as the nervous system, or a real understanding of the neurological developments of the brain, but nonetheless he's able to really at least understand what development is like, or growth out of something like the nervous system. And so that's kind of interesting to notice how, despite, being thousands of years ahead of most of our scientific understandings of the human body, he's able to somewhat put together how things like the nervous system, things like our brains and how they function, how they develop along, could be associated here with what Aristotle has to say of, the hierarchy of the soul and how it grows over time and changes, and its functions change with it. So this then leads to his claim of, out of the hierarchy here, the rational has the capacity of immortality simply because it's an abstract thought. And if it's an abstract thought, as we've demonstrated in previous videos, it's detached from the physical. And so we're able to think about these things despite being detached from, personal experience, and we have independency from sensation or just physical things, because in the act of abstract thinking, we are, of course, thinking in an abstraction of the physical things. The rational soul then is grasping the eternal essences or the forms through, of course, abstract reasoning, abstract thinking. The participation of it moves us away from the physical when we talk about such things. And Aristotle isn't necessarily clear as well about beyond with immortality, and we talk of the idea of individuality continuing after death. So it does seem that sometimes he does talk about the immortality of the soul on a sort of individual basis, how it could potentially be retained, after your, the physical expiration of you on this planet, if you will, ends. Is it retained afterward? And in some cases he does talk like this. In other cases it emerges back, sort of like how Anaxagoras would talk about the mind nous example. The soul is somewhat returned back to the great mind that runs the universe, if you will, or has a sort of rationality to it, an explanation, and gives back and returns to it, if you will. And so out of this basis and understanding of the way of the soul, we can establish how Aristotle is going to find the basis of the good. And of course this is going to overlap tremendously with the teleological view of metaphysics, where Aristotle proposes that everything is ends orientated with final cause. And so the growth process has its final cause in life. The final cause, the essential nature, or the end, is its natural good that the process would actualize under similar circumstances. So what is ultimately normative, what is expected, and what has been observed over time through the growth process towards the ends. And so this reflects with human beings as well, with the supreme good, with its native capacity of the rational soul. And so Aristotle here is going to introduce this supreme good, that we have the capacity of the supreme good, or the highest good. And so because of his teleological view, it is an intrinsic good, and not to be confused with an instrumental. An instrumental good is for the goodness ultimately of something else. It's not for the sake of itself. Such is the case with currency, if you will. I know there's been a lot of talk about the penny not being printed anymore and being somewhat considered discontinued now. The penny in this case is good simply for what it can do for you, change or monetary value. It has other ends to it. It has something else towards its ends. It's not just for the sake of having money, but to exchange for goods. So it's instrumental in that case. Whereas Aristotle wants us to go for the intrinsic good, the goodness of itself, by the natural processes of the rational soul, thus making it good. It doesn't exclude lesser goods, of course, but embraces them all, so the less can serve the good as the greater whole. Something that is ultimately inclusive. It's applicable to the human species and is necessary for the species to participate. And of course, participation is then loaded with connotation to, of course, what Aristotle's dichotomy is of particulars and the universals, form and particular here again. And so by virtue of the universal nature of human beings, we have intrinsic and supreme good, and the universal can be applied by that particular human being through participation. Now we also have to ask, though, what is the supreme good, however? What does that mean? And so many problems arise in Aristotelian translation, because it gets kind of confusing from the Greek to English and other languages, which is to say that the term used in our society, we think of something more in line with individual pleasure, happiness, though. For Aristotle, when he talks about happiness, is not the pursuit of simply pleasure. Aristotle isn't interested in just hedonistic pleasure. It is the highest, and as such, those hedonistic pleasures is not the highest virtue for the rational animal here. In the Greek term, Eudaimonia, and this doesn't give much to translation, is ultimately as close as we can call it to well-being. And we don't have, of course, the vocabulary necessarily that Aristotle's trying to get at. And as such, we don't define the good. We have to pay attention to the eudaimonia, or the fulfillment of one, or the actualizing of the potential, to kind of sew up this translation here. It is about actualizing potential. But this is to say, though, when he talks about fulfillment, we're not necessarily as well talking about the individual fulfillment that we think of today. Aristotle doesn't care about just our feelings or our lone desires being satisfied. Instead, it is the fulfillment of actualizing the rationality of the human soul and its intrinsic and inclusive value that all human beings are able to participate in. And so as we continue here with Aristotle, we see the good as the actualization of human potential. And to get to the crux of this, I have a quote here which follows: "A complete life lived in accordance with reason and in accordance to virtue." Now, notice in this quote here that the Greek echo continues of the ascension of human reason and its virtues. Notice, of course, when he uses the word complete. And this is a key here for Aristotle. Whereas, of course, his predecessor teacher, Plato, wanted the good of a soul that can function perfectly well without, of course, lived bodies. Plato, in many cases, of course, had problems really with the physical sensation or just this reality in general, of course. So Aristotle here is going to flip and make a very distinct change here with regards to a complete life within the body, within us. Because, of course, with Plato, the highest conception that he conceived of a well-balanced soul was, of course, contemplation. Plato's ethical idea inspires a contemplative way of life. And of course, Aristotle isn't opposed to us, thinking deeply about problems or how we treat each other. And this also is a play into how, as you can see, Platonic philosophy will have, tons of mysticism and implications, especially when we get to the medievals when it comes to the ideas of the contemplative life. Whereas, of course, with Aristotle here is, again, he's, not against contemplation. It is more about the highest good of a complete life. The human being for Aristotle, unlike Plato, we're not trapped in this human experience through the lived body, or this body being a sort of prison of my soul, but instead we're rational animals. We, as human beings, are good by actualizing and being distinctively a rational animal, which ultimately gives us responsibility over this world. And as such, we should act as if we're all guided together by reason with virtue. And of course, he's painting us a holistic picture here, or at least an approach to it. And to put a bow on this, though, I want to say that Aristotle wants the active participation of the soul's natural functions, the good by today called human flourishing, or the human quality of life. And so with that, this is just a brief overture of where we're heading with Aristotelian ethics, why he views the soul as such, the sort of hierarchy out of that, and how us as human beings are rational animals, and what that's going to mean for him going forward as we participate in the supreme good. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you for the next one as we go deeper into Aristotelian ethics here.